If you're on an H-1B or if you're looking at applying for adjustment of status right now, there's a new USCIS memo that you need to understand. All right, to start, what are outstanding equities? In plain English, it's the evidence that you present to justify to USCIS why you deserve a green card as a matter of discretion. Adjustment of status has always been discretionary. Essentially, a USCIS officer has always had the ability to determine whether someone has good moral character or not in order to merit adjustment of status. That part is not new. What the memo has done is to tell officers to lean into that discretion, essentially to treat the green card from inside the US as the exception rather than the standard rule, and to scrutinize applications before they approve them. The biggest takeaway with the new adjustment of status process is that now you need to show the positives outweigh the negatives. Rather than showing the absence of any bad moral character, you now need to show that you have good moral character, that you have a good reason. So category number one would be family and personal ties. If you have any US citizen children, I would include their birth certificates here. I would include their school records to show that they live here and that you have a thriving family, let's say. If you have a US citizen or green card holder spouse, I would also include your marriage certificate. I would also include proof of your marriage or the reality of your relationship. So I would include any documents showing that you have joint property, leases, bank accounts, expenses, essentially anything that shows that your life here is rooted in the US with Americans. Category number two would be financial integration. The next best thing that you can do, in my opinion, is to show that you're not likely to become a public charge, right? So next thing to show would be financial integration. I would include every year since you have lived in the US, copies of your tax returns. I would include copy of your W-2s or 1099s. I would include proof of property ownership. So if you have any deeds, mortgage statements, any other financial accounts, let's say 401k, IRA, Roths, any brokerage accounts, and proof of any businesses that you own. If you own a business here in the US that is creating jobs, I would show your payroll records, show that you are creating employment and financial prosperity here in the US, right? You essentially want to show you are paying into and investing into the American financial system. Category number three would be stable employment. If I were you, I would include proof that you have either a stable employer or a profitable or stable business that you own. So a few things that I would recommend that you include would be a current employment verification letter, pay stubs for the last year, proof that you have progressive experience in your career. If you start off at a junior level, that you have grown. If you have any professional licenses or certificates, if you have a letter of recommendation from an employer or colleagues that explain why your role matters. All of these things can be very significant. Category four would be character evidence. There's basically two types of evidence I would try to include here. One would be proving the absence of bad moral character, and next would be proving good moral character. So in proving that you don't have bad moral character, I would show, let's say, an FBI background check or police certificate showing that you don't have any crimes or conviction record, right? If you have a tax compliance history, if you have recommendation letters from American citizens or residents who can speak to the kind of person that you are. If you have a police clearance certificate from your home country, you can get that on the US visa reciprocity schedule if you want to look up that link with the State Department. Another thing that I've been telling people to include is just proof that you go beyond what the average person does. So let's say that you donate blood or you volunteer at a homeless shelter or at a church or community. If you contribute financially or you contribute your time or other resources there, these are all things that I would include in your application. I know for a lot of people who do this type of volunteer work, it's very natural to not want to brag or talk about yourself or talk about the good things that you do, right? Obviously, as a biblical value, you're not really supposed to do your alms before men. Unfortunately for USCIS, that's exactly what they are looking for. They want to see evidence that you are a good person. And for immigration purposes, you would be best served mentioning and discussing these contributions that you have made. I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but if you're one of those people who visits fast food restaurants and when you're asked to make a donation that you always round up, I would include that evidence in your application. If you have any of those receipts, you can add those to your application. Category 5, I already touched on this. This would be community involvement, right? If you have any volunteer records, church or religious community, professional associations or university associations, charitable giving. Let's say you serve in any volunteer boards, even the HOA or civic communities. I would try to show that, right? These may seem small or insignificant on their own, but together it just helps to show the overall point that you have outstanding equities justifying your request. Okay, next, let's talk about when to gather the evidence. From the time that you submit your adjustment of status application until the time that you receive an interview, that time can be relatively short. I've had that be as little as 1 week. I would say most commonly, you could expect your AOS interview to be scheduled sometime between 3 weeks to 2 months out from the date of receiving the I-797 for your interview. What does that mean? That means if you already submitted your adjustment of status, the best time to prepare this evidence would be now. If you're working on your recommendation letters, maybe you don't have to actually get those written and signed yet, but I would at least reach out to the contacts that you believe are likely to support you and get this on their radar. If you already have your interview notice, obviously you have a specific time that you know you're going to need these documents. So I would make sure to start working on those immediately. The next best thing that you can do is to organize all of these documents in the best way possible to present to the USCIS officer. Keep in mind, you can already upload these documents in your USCIS online account if you have access to that. And secondly, I would also prepare like a physical folder. You can use those cool little tabs or exhibit pages to separate the supporting evidence that you have and be prepared to take that in person to the USCIS interview. I would be prepared to give these documents alongside your other adjustment of status documents. So whether you're applying based on marriage and you're giving the officer your marriage evidence, or you're applying based on employment and you need to give them a copy of your 485 supplement J, I would be prepared to give them all these documents around the same time. All right, last thing I'm going to talk about are most common mistakes that I see in preparing adjustment of status applications. I also think even with the recency of this new memo, these are common mistakes that I see that are pretty easily avoidable that I would be ready to address before you submit your application or before your interview. So mistake number 1 would be waiting for a request for evidence before preparing the documents. Keep in mind, by the time USCIS sends you a request for evidence, you are going to have at most 87 days to produce the evidence that they are requesting. The worst thing that I hate when this happens with my clients is when you go to an adjustment of status interview expecting an approval, or you're going there optimistic that you're going to get an approval, and then afterwards to have USCIS issue you an RFE or request for evidence asking for more documents. You don't want to delay the process. You've already waited so many months or maybe even years for your green card up to this point. I would go prepared to try and avoid an RFE if you can. Sometimes RFEs are unavoidable, but if you can go prepared with the documents that you know they're going to ask for, that they're likely to ask for anyway, you're going to save yourself a lot of potential heartache or headache in advance. All right, mistake number 2 would be volume over quality. The best thing that you can do is it's much better to prepare a concise application that is relatively short rather than thousands of pages of immaterial documents that don't say anything. If the officer has to wonder what each piece of evidence means, if they don't know what it does, it's not worth including. I would also include an index of exhibits in the front of your application summarizing not only what the document is, but the reason you've included it in your application. I think that's one of the best things that you can do. You got to think these USCIS officers are human. They also don't know your story too. So we want to make it as idiot proof as possible for them to understand the reason you've included each document. All right, mistake number 3 would be not properly vetting your character reference letters. I would be careful to only ask recommendation letters from people who genuinely know you and can truly attest to the character attributes or to the facts that they write on their letters. The second thing that I would do is to make sure that the contact information that is listed on these recommendation letters is actually the person's contact information. The worst thing that you want to do is to have have the USCIS try to call or email the contact information that you have there in order for them to get the error code. We're sorry, this number cannot be completed as dialed, doesn't exist. That doesn't look great. In my experience, it's very unlikely or uncommon for USCIS to contact your recommenders, but you want to make sure if they do that they are prepared to verify and or testify to the facts that they have written as being real. I'm also going to read you 3 questions that I've seen from USCIS in a request for evidence pertaining to the outstanding equities questions. It also would not surprise me to see these questions actually asked in an interview. I'm going to briefly go through these with you. I'm also going to share these on the screen. Okay, so number 1, why did you apply for adjustment of status in the United States instead of going through consular processing? So that's number 1. Number 2, are there any factors that prevent you from applying through consular processing? And number 3, why did you not return to your home country when your authorized period of stay expired and you became out of status? This would only apply to people who had entered on a non-immigrant status that had expired. Keep in mind, the law does allow for forgiveness for immediate relatives of U.S. citizens who have overstayed their authorized period of stay. You essentially now are just going to need to explain why USCIS should exercise their discretion favorably in your case. This is where I think that the more evidence that you can prepare of your outstanding equities, do your best to show your ties to the U.S., everything that I've explained throughout this video, and I would prepare all of these in advance to address these questions.